A federal judge, handcuffed, treated like a drug criminal in the middle of a crowded airport in front of hundreds of curious eyes. Humiliation and anger welled up, but he tried to hold it in. Why? Why him? Just because he is a successful black man? Just because his suit makes them itchy? Those people who are gloating over catching a criminal have no idea what a terrible mistake they have just made. They have no idea that the hand they have just handcuffed has the power to decide the fate of countless people, including those who abuse power like them. What will happen when his true identity is revealed? What will become of his arrogance? Will justice be served for the one who represents it? And what lessons will be learned from this disastrous misjudgment? Let's listen to this story to witness the confrontation between prejudice and power and the surprising ending that awaits. Denver International Airport on a weekend afternoon is a picture of hustle and bustle. People stream in from all over, announcements echo through the vast waiting area, suitcase wheels clatter on polished marble floors. Amidst the bustle, Federal Judge Arthur Sterling steps out of the overhead bin of a flight that has just landed from Washington, D.C., carrying his usual calm and dignity. At 60, Judge Sterling still retains his commanding presence. He is tall and straight, his perfectly tailored suit unwrinkled, highlighting his well-proportioned figure. His white shirt is carefully starched, his silk tie is neatly knotted. His shiny black Oxford shoes reflect the lights on the station ceiling. He carries a black alligator briefcase, an exquisite accessory that adds to his air of authority and intelligence. Though a little tired after a 3-day judicial conference, his eyes are sharp, always observing and assessing his surroundings, a professional instinct ingrained after many years on the bench. He blended into the stream of passengers moving towards the baggage claim area and the exit, walking slowly but firmly. He did not try to attract attention, but his neat appearance and special aura still attracted a few glances. He just wanted to go home soon, to return to the quiet of his office or the warmth of his family after a stressful day at work. Meanwhile, in a more obscure corner of the arrivals hall, 2 Denver airport patrol officers were on duty. Officer Vincent Rossi, a white man in his 50s with a somewhat scowl and a look of tiredness and venom in his eyes, was leaning against the wall, absently watching the traffic. Next to him was Officer Dale Harding, much younger, in his late 20s, trying to appear alert and energetic. Suddenly, a tablet mounted on the dashboard of a nearby patrol car beeped softly, signaling a new message from the security dispatch system. Rossi glanced at the screen. A security alert had just been sent to the arrivals area they were responsible for. Security alert, Gate B32 area. Subject, male, black, wearing dark suit. Suspect, possible possession of controlled substances based on preliminary intelligence and analysis of unidentified passenger records. Area patrolled with increased vigilance and appropriate subject checks if found. The notice is quite general, based on vague information and profiling, a controversial method because of its potential for discrimination. It does not provide any specific evidence, just a possibility, a suspicion. Rossi finished reading the notice, raised his head, his sharp eyes scanned the crowd, and then his eyes stopped on Judge Arthur Sterling, who had just passed by their position not far away. Male, black, wearing a dark suit. A perfect match to that sketchy description. A knowing smirk appeared on Rossi's face. His old prejudice against black people, especially those who looked rich, immediately surfaced. He did not trust their success, always assuming there must be something shady behind it. This announcement, though vague, became the perfect excuse for him to approach and check the man who made him feel uncomfortable. "Hey, Dale," Rossi nudged Harding, a hint of glee in his voice. "Look at that guy. He seems to fit the bill. It's not unusual for someone who dresses that well to be involved in drugs, right?" Harding followed Rossi's gaze to Judge Sterling. He hesitated for a moment, seeing the man's imposing manner, but Rossi was his superior, the one with experience. Harding quickly dismissed his doubts. "Yes, sir. Looks worth checking out. Maybe it's the right guy. So, with the legitimate excuse from the system, but actually motivated by personal prejudice, Rossi and Harding separated from their positions, strode quickly toward Judge Sterling, trying to appear professional but unable to hide their complacency. They stopped the judge rather abruptly, stopping him in his tracks. "Sir," Rossi said first, his tone trying to be serious but still containing a hint of condescension. "We are airport police. We have received a security alert about a suspected drug suspect with your physical characteristics in the area. Would you please stop so we can ask you a few questions?" Judge Sterling paused, turning to face the two officers. He frowned slightly at Rossi's words, but maintained his usual calm demeanor. "Security notice? Suspected drug possession?" he asked, his voice low and clear, his eyes piercingly fixed on Rossi. "Can you tell me more about that notice, and on what basis I am suspected?" He did not appear afraid, simply wanting to clarify the matter according to due process of law. Judge Sterling's calm demeanor and direct questioning seemed to make Officer Rossi uncomfortable. He was used to seeing people appear fearful or at least nervous when stopped by the police, especially for suspected drugs. The calmness of the black man before him was interpreted by him as defiance, as concealment. "This is routine airport security, sir," Rossi replied, his voice starting to get a little impatient. "We need to verify the information we received. Please show me your identification." Judge Sterling, though feeling a little ridiculous, decided to cooperate at first. He slowly opened his briefcase, took out his wallet, and pulled out his driver's license, handing it to Rossi. "Here's my paperwork, but I'd like to know more about the basis of this suspicion." Rossi picked up the license, glanced at the photo and information, Arthur Sterling, address in affluent area, then looked back up at the judge with a critical, judgmental gaze. The drug alert had seemed to have been a pretext at first, and now Rossi's attention was focused on his appearance and perceived status. "Arthur Sterling?" Rossi muttered the name, then smirked. "That suit must have cost a fortune, right? What kind of business is this that gets flagged by the system for drug use, or is this just a fancy facade?" He deliberately steered the conversation toward sarcasm and personal attacks, completely deviating from the original security reason. Officer Harding, seeing his boss was attacking, quickly chimed in, trying to appear as if he was also knowledgeable. "Yeah, you don't look like the kind of people we usually check for these kinds of cases. Something doesn't add up." At this point, Judge Sterling knew for sure that the so-called security announcement was just a flimsy excuse. The real goal of these two policemen was discrimination based on his skin color and appearance. Anger began to rise inside him, but he tried to keep his voice calm and reasonable. "Officers," he said, his voice even but noticeably colder, "I realize this interrogation is straying far from the original reasoning you gave. Your comments about my dress or your inferences about my profession are completely inappropriate and irrelevant. This action clearly shows signs of discrimination." The word discrimination seemed to touch a sensitive nerve for Rossi. He hated being lectured or accused by someone, especially a black person. His face turned red with anger. "What discrimination?" Rossi snapped, his voice becoming rude. "You're the one who's suspicious here. Don't act like you know the law. I hate it when black upstarts act like they're rich and look down on others." He couldn't maintain his fake professionalism any longer and began swearing and using overt racial slurs. Harding, seeing Rossi's anger, also became more aggressive, taking another step towards the judge. "You better shut your mouth and cooperate, or you'll get into more trouble." Judge Sterling realized that the situation could no longer be resolved by reasoning with these prejudiced individuals. He decided to request a meeting with their superiors. "I will not continue this pointless and insulting conversation. I request to speak to your supervisor immediately." That request, to Rossi, was the ultimate proof of resistance. He could not accept such a public challenge to his authority. "Oh, now you dare call the boss?" Rossi roared, his anger turning into action. Who do you think you are? Resisting a law enforcement officer. I suspect you of concealing contraband. He tried to return to the original pretext to legitimize his next move. Dale, handcuff him for me. Search his stash. Harding, though momentarily hesitant at the judge's unnatural calm, obeyed at Rossi's stern command and carried away by the ferocity of the situation. He lunged forward, trying to grab Judge Sterling's arm. "What are you doing?" The judge protested loudly, trying to keep his distance. "This is an illegal arrest. You have no right." He may have slapped Harding's hand away in self-defense when he was suddenly attacked. That act of self-defense was immediately interpreted as fierce resistance. "See? He's resisting!" Rossi shouted, also rushing to Harding's aid. A chaotic and embarrassing scene unfolded in the middle of the crowded airport waiting room. Two large police officers struggled to restrain an older man who tried to maintain his dignity and protested only verbally. Passengers around him panicked and moved away, many taking out their phones to record the scene. Finally, muscle won out. Judge Arthur Sterling's arms were twisted behind his back by two police officers. The cold metal clanged as the handcuffs tightened around his wrists. A sharp pain and numbness shot up his arm. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the utter humiliation that invaded his soul. Treated like a drug criminal, handcuffed and publicly humiliated simply because of the color of his skin and the suit he wore. The garment that symbolized the dignity of the judiciary was now skewed and crumpled under the rough hands of those who abused their power. Rossi stood panting, looking at the handcuffed judge with a crooked grin of triumph. "See," he said, his voice full of gloating. "I told you. You think you're cool with nice clothes? Now come with us to the station. We'll see if you, a fake judge, can still talk. We'll definitely find the goods on you." He emphasized the word fake judge deliberately as a final taunt. Judge Sterling closed his eyes for a moment, trying to swallow the bitter taste of injustice and anger. He knew he had to stay calm. This storm was not over, but he believed that justice would eventually come. The two policemen began to escort Judge Sterling away toward the airport security office or some other holding area. They kept muttering nasty things, full of triumph at having subdued the stubborn man. The surrounding passengers watched with curiosity, pity, and fear. Rossi took out a small notebook and pen, preparing to write down the initial information of the target. He glanced at Judge Sterling, whose arm was tightly held by Harding, and asked in an arrogant manner, almost as if giving an order, "Speak. Full name? Occupation?" Judge Sterling, despite the stinging pain of his handcuffed wrists and his deeply wounded pride, remained remarkably calm. His voice rang out clearly, without a trace of tremor or fear, over the noisy airport. "Arthur Sterling." Rossi scribbled the name in his notebook, then looked up at him with disdain, as if expecting some trivial answer. "Sterling? That sounds fancy. Now, what do you do that makes you dress like a king? What kind of business?" Judge Sterling looked straight into Rossi's smug eyes. He knew it was time for the truth to come out, not to save himself from this humiliating situation, but to make these abusers face the consequences of their foolish actions based on prejudice. His voice rang out, not too loud but with enough weight to cut through the surrounding noise, carrying an undeniable authority. "I am a federal judge." He paused for a beat, letting the two words sink in. Then he continued, slowly, enunciating each word, as if reading a final verdict. "United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit." Silence suddenly fell over the small space where they stood. The noise of the airport seemed to recede, leaving only the ringing in their ears. Vincent Rossi's face, flushed with anger and smugness, suddenly turned deathly pale. The pen he was holding fell to the floor with a clatter. His eyes widened as he stared at Judge Sterling, unable to believe what he had just heard. His mouth opened wide, trying to say something, but only incoherent, meaningless sounds came out. "Judge! Judge!" He finally managed to stutter out loud, his voice cracking and trembling uncontrollably. Federation? 10th District? He staggered, unconsciously taking a step back, his eyes filled with horror as he looked at Judge Sterling, as if he had just seen a ghost from hell. Dale Harding, the young cop, reacted even worse. When he heard the title federal judge, he froze, his face drained of color. His hands that had been holding Judge Sterling dropped reflexively. He looked at the judge, then back at Rossi with a desperate, pleading look, then down at the handcuffs on the man he had violently thrown down just minutes before. Absolute fear took hold of him. "Oh, no, it can't be," he whispered, his voice trembling. His legs went weak, his knees began to shake. The 180-degree change in attitude from arrogance to utter panic between the two policemen happened so quickly and clearly that even the people around them could feel it. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they could clearly see that the confidence they had felt earlier had disappeared, replaced by unconcealable fear. Rossi was the first to break free from his paralysis, driven by a panicked survival instinct. The dire consequences, job loss, lawsuits, even possible prosecution, loomed before him. He rushed toward Judge Sterling, almost bowing, his voice changing completely, pleading, urgent, and desperate. Your Honor, my God, please forgive me," Rossi stammered, his face pale, sweat pouring down his temples. This is just a terrible mistake, an unforgivable mistake. We really don't know who you are." He turned sharply to Harding, who was still frozen, and shouted in a voice trembling with panic, "Harding, you fool! What are you standing there for? Uncuff me! Uncuff me, Judge! Hurry! Do you want us both to lose everything?" Harding jumped as if he had been electrocuted. He fumbled to pull the keys from his belt, but his hands shook so much that he dropped the entire bunch on the floor. He quickly bent down to pick them up, his face blank, fumbling for the right handcuff key. It took him a few precious seconds of tense silence before he finally inserted the key into the lock. There was a dry click as the handcuffs were released, freeing Judge Arthur Sterling's deeply scarred wrists. All the while, Rossi kept pleading, his voice filled with tears and belated remorse. We're so sorry, Your Honor. It's just that security briefing. It wasn't clear. We were just trying to do our job. Maybe we were a little overzealous. Please forgive us. Please don't ruin our careers. We have families to take care of." Judge Sterling slowly reached forward with both hands, gently rubbing the painful welts on his wrists. He said nothing. He did not respond to the desperate pleas, did not express anger or forgiveness. He simply stood there, silently looking at the two cowering men with a cold, deep, judgmental gaze. A federal judge's silence at this moment spoke louder than 1,000 accusations. It signaled that justice, however delayed by prejudice, would eventually come. Just as the air was thick with Rossi and Harding's panic and Judge Sterling's commanding silence, a steady, professional female voice rang out. "What's going on here?" Lieutenant Ava Rostova, the officer in charge of the area, walked quickly over. She was a middle-sized woman in a neat uniform, with a stern face but a keen gaze. Perhaps she had received a report of the disturbance, or had simply been on patrol and noticed something unusual. Lieutenant Rostova's eyes scanned the scene. Judge Arthur Sterling stood upright, his suit a little disheveled, his wrists red with handcuff marks, but his eyes steady. Opposite her were her two subordinates, Rossi and Harding, in a state of near collapse, their faces pale and sweating. She immediately realized that this was no ordinary incident. Perhaps she had recognized Judge Sterling before, or at least sensed the different temperament and seriousness of the situation from the reactions of her two subordinates. "Rossi? Harding? Report!" Lieutenant Rostova ordered, her voice unyielding. Rossi and Harding, startled, tried to stand up straight, but still looked shaken and frightened. Rossi, the older of the two, tried to make light of the situation, blaming unclear system notifications and misunderstandings during the verification process, but his tone lacked confidence, and his words were disjointed and contradictory. Lieutenant Rostova frowned, clearly not believing the clumsy explanation. She turned to Judge Sterling, her demeanor respectful. "Sir, I am Lieutenant Rostova, overseeing this area. Sorry for the inconvenience. Could you tell me what happened from your perspective?" Judge Sterling spoke now. His voice was low and even, without any trace of agitation, like that of a man presenting objective facts in court. He recounted the whole incident in a coherent manner. The stoppage on the basis of a vague notice, the questioning with irrelevant and prejudiced questions about appearance and race, the denial of the right to speak to a superior, and finally the insult, the use of force, and the illegal arrest with handcuffs. He did not need to repeat his title. Lieutenant Rostova's attitude suggested that she already knew or had guessed. Lieutenant Rostova listened intently, her face growing increasingly serious. She was a professional and experienced police officer, smart enough to see who was telling the truth and the seriousness of her two subordinates' mistakes. She looked at Rossi and Harding with disappointment and anger. "Rossi, Harding," she said, her voice hard. "You two, turn in your badges, weapons, and radios immediately. You are suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of the investigation. Stand aside and say no more until instructed." The two policemen stammered in obedience in despair and humiliation. Their futures were all but sealed at that moment. Lieutenant Rostova turned to face Judge Sterling, her expression solemn and apologetic. "Judge Sterling," she said, her voice sincere. "On behalf of the entire Denver Airport Police Force, I offer my deepest apologies for the completely unacceptable and disgraceful behavior of these officers. This was a serious violation not only of you personally, but of the principles and ethics of the profession that we strive to uphold." She continued, "We are committed to conducting a full, transparent internal investigation and treating this incident with the utmost seriousness. There will be no cover-ups or leniency. Do you need medical assistance or anything else?" Judge Sterling shook his head slightly. The mark on his wrist was painful but not serious. "I do not require medical attention, but I would like to make an official statement of the entire incident." "Of course, Your Honor," Lieutenant Rostova replied. "We will arrange for you to be seated at once in a more private and comfortable place." Judge Sterling nodded. "And one more thing, Lieutenant. I'm ordering that the entire video and audio footage from both Officer Rossi and Officer Harding's body cameras be preserved and unaltered. That would be irrefutable evidence." "Your request has been noted and will certainly be carried out, Your Honor," Rostova affirmed. "That tape will be at the heart of the investigation." She signaled another officer to escort Judge Sterling to the security office. Before leaving, the judge took one last look at Rossi and Harding. They stood there, heads bowed, their futures as uncertain as the foolishness of their actions. Justice might be delayed, but it could not be denied. The case of a federal judge wrongly arrested and mistreated by airport police based on racial bias quickly sent shockwaves through Denver Airport Police and into the justice system. An internal investigation was conducted with close supervision from superiors and possibly interest from federal agencies. As Judge Sterling had requested, the body camera footage of Rossi and Harding became irrefutable evidence. It laid bare the entire truth, from Rossi's use of a vague system notification as a pretext, to his rapid transition into racially and physically biased questioning, to his insults and slurs, to his escalating violence when confronted, to his panic and desperate pleas when he learned of the victim's true identity. The footage was a powerful demonstration of the officer's abuse of power, unprofessionalism, and deep-seated discrimination. In addition, the original security notice was also reviewed. The results showed that the suspected drugs information based on preliminary intelligence and profiling was extremely weak, and did not justify such drastic measures without further suspicious signs. This further strengthened the argument that Rossi and Harding used the notice as an excuse to satisfy their personal prejudices. Faced with clear evidence and pressure from many sides, the conclusion of the internal investigation was inevitable. Officer Vincent Rossi and Officer Dale Harding seriously violated a series of regulations on professional procedures, used inappropriate language, abused power, discriminated, and illegally detained people. The consequences were swift and inevitable. Both Rossi and Harding were fired from the Denver Airport Police Department. Rossi's decades-long career and Harding's fledgling future were upended by a few minutes of blind action, driven by prejudice and complacency. They may also face civil lawsuits from Judge Sterling for emotional distress and damages, but that is not public. A few days after the incident, Judge Arthur Sterling sat in his quiet office at the federal courthouse. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the stacks of case files awaiting him. He had returned to his daily routine, but the aftermath of the airport incident lingered, not in lingering fear or anger, but in a thoughtful, complicated feeling. He felt relieved that the matter had been resolved quickly, and that the wrongdoers had paid the price for their actions. But deep down, he could not help but feel a lingering sadness and disappointment. He, a man who had devoted his life to the law, a man who sat on the bench to protect justice and righteousness, could become a victim of the very injustice and prejudice he had always tried to fight against. He knew that if he had not been a federal judge, if he had been an ordinary Arthur Sterling, a lawyer, a businessman, or any other black man in a nice suit, the story might have gone very differently. He might have been taken to the police station, subjected to a humiliating search, falsely accused, and would have had to fight a long, expensive legal battle to clear his name. His status had inadvertently shielded him from the worst consequences, but it had also exposed a sad truth about the inequality that still existed in the system. Justice in his case came quickly, but would it come to everyone? That question lingered in his mind. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked down at the bustling crowd on the street below. The incident, though painful, was a powerful reminder of his responsibility. As a judge, he had to continue to steadfastly defend fairness, ensuring that the law was applied equally to all, regardless of skin color, status, or circumstances. As a citizen, an African American who had experienced discrimination, he felt he had to speak up, to take action to help change perceptions, eliminate prejudice, and build a truly just society. He returned to his desk and picked up a file. His eyes were determined. There was much work to be done, and the fight against injustice was long. But he would not back down, because he believed in justice, and he knew that, no matter how difficult, the fight was worth it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.